Okay, everybody, David Fogel here, CEO of the Symphonina Foundation, and I'm joined by Christopher Siu today. Chris, my friend, you're a classically trained pianist. You're also a singer-songwriter. You're based in Toronto, Canada. Is that where you grew up?
It is. I've been here my whole life. Yeah.
You've been there
Absolutely.
your whole life, and yet somehow you found a passion for Disney music. How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm super
Oh,
glad to be here.
it's my pleasure, and
Thank
everybody who's going
you.
to listen to you's pleasure, I'm sure.
No, well, thank you. No, I don't know. I feel like I grew up with a lot of the golden age classic Disney films, and some of my favorites have to be still Beauty and the Beast, and um, there's magic in Little Mermaid and Aladdin, and Alan Menken has just been so prolific, but it seems like so much of his output sticks with you, right? And
Hmm.
I'm sure, like before I even knew his names, a lot of his tunes got in my head already. And then growing up classically, there was a lot of classical romantic era music that you practice as well. But over time, these influences kind of just, I guess, bleed into your own personality, your own sound eventually. So,
Yes, bleed might be a strong word to use,
yeah.
but but it
Yes.
might be an accurate one.
Right.
Sometimes it depends
Right.
on how many hours you're practicing. So
Exactly.
how old were you when you got started on the piano?
I was five, I believe. Yeah.
Okay,
Five.
that's an age
Hmm.
that's for me too. I started when I was five, so I've had
Correct. Yeah.
a lot of people I interview who are very proficient start, of course, at a very young age, but not all of them.
Hmm.
So that's good.
Right.
So you started with classical straight off the bat, right? And then, if
Yes.
I remember correctly, you have a bachelor's degree in piano performance. Is that true?
Correct. Yes. My degree's in classical piano performance, and honestly, my entire musical education up until like after I graduated, honestly, was classically based. And that's to no fault of my upbringing or anything. I think it's just the traditional way of doing things for a lot of our families. And I like for myself, it was when I discovered pop and video game music and those sorts of things where I sort of grew an appreciation for those styles. And when I started writing music, I sort of, I guess, channeled some of those influences into my writing. But I really am grateful to classical music for at least setting a foundation moving forward.
Yeah, I found you many years ago on YouTube as one of
Mm,
the people to do orchestral YouTube educational videos. Great
right.
ones, by the way.
Thank you.
And for anybody who's interested in learning how to write orchestra music or just improving their own orchestral compositional skills, maybe getting other ideas, I wholeheartedly encourage you to go to YouTube and find the great resources that are out there. And Chris is definitely one of them. So let's move on then in your progression from um, just learning classical piano, which is generally mostly about performing other people's work,
Yeah.
to creating your own work and then translating that from creating just work for the piano, let's say, into becoming an orchestral composer. What were the transitions in your life that led to that?
I mean, you summed it up perfectly. I always say to my or people who ask me how I got into it, that I much prefer creating my own music than replicating dead people's music. And that's mainly for, classical composers and that sort of thing. Maybe it sounds a little mean, but it's I think there's something very fulfilling
They're
about
not here to defend themselves, Chris.
that's
So.
right. So I can say whatever I want.
Well,
But
yeah, yeah.
they
We want to be kind, though.
that's right, yes. All respect your elders and everything, of
That's
course.
this, absolutely. We wouldn't be here if they weren't here. So.
Exactly. Yes. But yeah, I think there's actually, so I had two friends in high school. One was a DJ. He did a lot of parties and stuff, and then the other was a pianist who improvised constantly in the music room during recess. And I was influenced by both of them. And then I saw that you can make music on the computer from my DJ friend, my improvising guy friend. He was creating ideas off the fly, just like nothing. And I was like, wow, what if I tried my hand at writing music? And in music class, we actually had a lot of iMacs set up around there, so they had GarageBand built into them, and that was the point where I started doodling and played around with piano ideas. Um, and but my first like real compositions were actually orchestral pieces because at the time of going into university, that's the same time I started taking a look at sample libraries and exploring the world of virtual instruments. And so I had always sort of been interested in like Nintendo music, especially Super Mario music. Like Super Mario Galaxy has really beautiful orchestral scores, and that was sort of the the kickoff point for me to start to try to write orchestral music using sample libraries. And my very first pieces were all sort of influenced by those scores. And then I guess over time, as you write more music, you refine your sound. And one of the greatest compliments I personally believe you can receive is that someone saying you have your own personality in your sound or in your music, right? Like you have that distinct sound. And to this day, I can't really pinpoint exactly what my sound is, but as long as I'm writing authentically to myself, I feel like the rest sort of takes care of itself, right? You shouldn't put pressure on yourself to try to write in a certain way. I think if you just write what's true to you and you feel good about it, then the rest will come. So anyway,
But you do have constraints when someone hires you to create
yes,
orchestral music for a particular thing, whether it's a film, a short animation, a video game,
right.
or just because they want you to, right? So how do you reconcile those conflicting objectives then a little bit?
Yeah, and that's the tough thing about working for media. I think a lot of my friends who do this for a living, scoring for films and video games, it's tough because I'm sure there are those pressures of having looming deadlines that could be really, really coming on you really quickly, and also the knowledge at the back of your head that your music is never entirely in your control at the end of the day when you're working for someone else. And from the experiences I had for working on a couple of films and some video games, I basically just had to adopt the mentality of I'm going to do whatever the client needs, whether that means I like it or not. It doesn't matter as much as long as they're happy. That's what really matters. And I think when you get into work for this sort of thing, you have to accept that and you have to know that. But I think that's why a lot of composers who do scoring and are also artists in their own right, they can be very successful because they have that mental separation between those two things. So in their artist careers, they can be as creative as they want. I think, I guess, Thomas Ferguson, right? Um, so for me personally, though, after scoring these few projects, I've decided that I prefer staying on my own. And while I do pick up the occasional orchestration project and mock-up work, I do prefer developing myself as an artist and trying to put music out there that touches people, but also music that I'm proud of 100%. So it's
Yeah, yeah.
important to me.
So as a professional musician and educator, then I
Mhm.
guess you have to try to balance a little bit between taking on a job that pays you money
Yeah.
and keeps your professional career going in that regard, which
Yes.
which is solid in its own objective, right?
Mm.
Versus your free time that you want to spend creating something. And then I guess my question for you is, when you create something in your free time that you want to put out on the web, let's say you're posting it to Spotify, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you're not getting rich off your Spotify streams. So, um, what innovative ways do you have for getting your music in front of people? And then also, how do you go about making a living as a musician and a composer and an educator?
Wow. Yeah, that's a jam-packed question. I love it. That's one of my favorite things to talk about, actually. Before I answer that, I think regarding the topic of taking on gigs, there's one thing I've sort of been sharing with students recently, and that is to see if a project specifically ticks two of three boxes. Number one, do you enjoy it? Number two, is it financially rewarding? And number three, does it further your career? And so I think if you can tick at least two of the three, then you're probably leaning towards taking that gig. But if it's just one of them, like maybe you enjoy it, but it's not financially lucrative, or it's not going to further your career, maybe reconsider. So I think those three aspects are important for really any gig we take on.
That's
But
very insightful, Chris. That's good. I like that.
oh,
Yeah,
okay, awesome, awesome.
2 out of 3 rule is good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Majority. So yeah, I guess in regards to making a living, you're right. You have to be sort of your own boss, I guess, in a way, because as a musician, as an artist, no one else is really going to shout out for you, right? Like you have to be in control of the things yourself. And I've said since day one that I really do believe having some sort of presence online is important, especially in today's day and age. YouTube is my personal choice because it's a search engine and the content that you put on there will never fade away as long as YouTube is active. Whereas if you're just focused on building a presence on social media, it's sort of a different story because those algorithms always change. And a lot of platforms, let's say Instagram, you post something up there 24 hours, it's pretty much gone from stories and whatever. But Google and YouTube, owned by the same company, they are search engines. So that's why I always recommend YouTube. It doesn't even have to be educational content, by the way. It could just be opening up a session and playing through your piece. People can see what instruments you have, or I don't know, like you can analyze music, like you can do whatever you want. But as long as you have some sort of distinct personality out there for people to come across, then you're just opening up multiple avenues for people to find you in the first place. And I've also always said that every single composing orchestration gig I've ever gotten was because of my YouTube channel in some form. The most common example I use is working with Tina Guo. So on Facebook, she was posting one day that she was looking for a MIDI orchestrator
So
for a new
Tina
piece.
is the cellist for Hans Zimmer,
For
if I
Hans Zimmer,
remember
correct?
correctly. Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
Go ahead.
exactly. Yes. So yeah, she made a Facebook post and she said, "Send me any music you might have to this email." And I said, "Okay, cool." And I'd actually released a new piece of music, I think maybe a week prior to this post. So I jumped at the chance. I sent her the piece, and she told me there were other applicants as well, but she did enjoy listening to my piece, and we ended up working together. And that piece is still up on her YouTube channel, which I'm very thankful for. And so that wouldn't have happened if I didn't have a piece of music on my YouTube channel to share in the first place. Yes, you could say, "Oh, what if you had it on Spotify or SoundCloud or something?" But then again, I think YouTube is a great place because it just stays on there forever, regardless of algorithms and stuff. So yeah, whatever you decide to do, whatever platform you decide on, you wanna find a way to stay relevant by posting somewhat regularly. And I think weekly is pretty typical to stay top of mind, but you could do every 2 weeks or every month or something. Um, but while you might not make a ton of money from doing that off the bat, it at least is getting you in front of people. For the monetary side, I mean, the power of diversification really is everything. So, if you can have a stable 9 to 5 while you're starting your journey in music, I would highly recommend sticking with that for the time being. You don't just want to quit your job and then suddenly have no money coming in. That's not a good idea. And
High pressure in that situation, right? Not
right.
generally good for creativity.
Yeah, exactly.
Generally, I mean, something maybe it is for someone, but it wouldn't be for
Yes,
me. So
right. Exactly. Same here. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, I think yeah, when I was building my online business, I was still teaching like 35, 40 hours a week
Oh,
with
that's a
my
lot,
students.
actually. Yeah, piano teaching, right?
Yeah, but that was my only source of income really at the
Hmm.
time. So piano in theory, and when COVID hit, actually, it wiped out a lot of the students for the time, and it allowed me the opportunity to really lean into the online thing because I always wanted to pivot away from private teaching. So it gave me the chance to start building a few educational courses and an online community, and I've started doing affiliate income here and there, doing accompaniment for different music festivals and studios. So there are many ways I think that you can use your existing skills to earn a living. It's just all about how can you add value to someone else. And if you can answer that question, if people can find what you do useful, then the sky really is the limit.
I think this is I hope this is a good question for you too. So you have talking about posting things on YouTube, which is sort of
Yeah.
a passive way of having
Mm.
people find you,
Yep.
and people do find you. But how much effort do you put into reaching out to other people to see if they have a need for you, and how much do you recommend other composers or people in that situation have to focus on being proactive about making those
Mm.
opportunities or finding them rather than letting them come to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think ultimately you have to be clear on your personal why. Like, why am I doing this? Um, if your personal reason for doing music and, like, let's say scoring for media is you can't live without it, then it makes complete sense to try to build that network yourself and try to find people. For me personally, I realized very early on that creating my own music was what gave me the most fulfillment and enjoyment. So I didn't really have as big of a need to reach out to other people to get work because I had my private teaching on the side anyway, and that was my main income to depend on. But if you really want to make a living in this, then of course it makes more sense to be proactive. And like I think the best thing you can do at the moment is to try to find conferences and events where you have these independent filmmakers or video game developers going to these places because it's not just online, like they literally see you in person.
Hmm.
And the in-person connection is so powerful, and that's really hard to do as an introvert, like myself. That's one reason I don't do
Yeah.
it. But yeah, and anyone who really asks me, I think if you really want to do this, then it makes sense to be in person at those events and just shop around. Like, be willing to just make connections and not feel like you have to sell your services right off the bat. Have a business card, whatever you want to do, put yourself out there in that respect. But yeah, at the same time, you do want to be putting yourself out there as well, like you have said, passively. Um, Online as well, though, you can join Facebook groups, you can join forums and see what things are out there. Um, but the one thing you don't want to be is desperate. Even if you do feel desperate for a gig, typically you don't want to show that. I think the best thing you can do is offer to do a piece of music for someone, free of charge. If it's for the first time, perfect, because maybe you're building your portfolio and you want to have a little bit of body of work before you start charging, which is totally fine. Working for free, I think, is appropriate up to a point. So if that's the case and you're willing to do that, then I think that's a great way, because then the developer isn't losing anything. In fact, they gain something for free, but then they get a sense of what you do. And if you're a good person to work with, if you vibe along with the other person, then it might turn into a collaborative partnership in the future. You never know.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting issue in general of like business development, whether that's in music or or selling Scotch tape or
Sure,
whatever,
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Scotch tape just comes to mind. But
Yeah.
whatever it is, how do you price what it is that your value is, and how much are you
Yes.
willing to do at a discount, all the way to doing it for free. I do a lot of collaboration work with friends when they ask me to play
Mm,
saxophone or piano or whatever on their thing, and
mm,
I almost always never charge them anything. It's just
right.
my time,
I see.
and I'm
Yeah.
happy to do it as long as it works into my schedule. But
Yes.
that's not like a profession for me to do that, right? That's just
Mm,
my own personal decision. If it was for actual something that was going to make money, then I'm
mm,
not so sure I would have that same uh, viewpoint, I guess, is the way to look at it. But I think one of the things you bring up there is important too, where, for someone who's introverted or is just more comfortable being by themselves, let's put it that way, right?
yeah.
As opposed to introvert, extrovert. Two things. One is, I bet that it helps to practice those interactions with people before you
Mm,
actually have to get to the one that you really want that gig from. So just like you practice your scales, you might want to do practice even in the mirror, whatever, talking to yourself. It sounds silly, but
mm,
practice how you would approach something and how you look as you're doing it, and kind of
yeah.
observe yourself doing it. Even video yourself maybe
Video's
would
the
be
best, I think.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I think that works too for performance when you're playing a piano or sax, whatever, videoing yourself from time to time and saying, "Hey, how do I look?"
Right.
That's important. And then the other is, if you're going to do something at a discount for someone, whether it's for free or for something less than you would like, you might be able to work something where you have a deal, like, I'll do this one, and then hopefully it can build into something else, or let's do it as part of a thing that will lead to something else, or I'll be back to you
Mm,
for a gig on this other thing that I know you're working on later. Just something where
right.
you set up an expectation where, people who are not scrupulous, I guess might be too strong a word, but whatever, they might just conveniently forget that they had paid some obligation to you or whatever, or
Mm,
just say, you,
mm,
hey, something's changed, I'm not in that position anymore. And that could be true, but at
mm.
least you planted that seed to
Yes.
hopefully grow for you, as opposed to just sort of giving it away. So
Yeah.
yeah, I know this is a
It's
touchy subject for a lot of composers and performers too, right? How
yeah,
much
yeah.
how much live performances have you done, Chris? Do you do a lot of
Um,
them, or do you just do teaching or whatever?
yeah, I mean, growing up, live performances were pretty much all I did.
Hmm.
Festivals, competitions, whatever. And I think I was young enough at the point where I wasn't really nervous in front of people. But
That's good.
it's like
That's
well, yeah, no,
good.
I found that the older I get, the more nervous I get
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
performing piano. But um, yeah, nowadays it's really just making my own music in my studio and creating content and all of that. If I did have a chance to do another live performance someday, it would be super fun. But I'd most likely it'd be playing and singing at the same time or something like that. Probably not
Yeah, yeah.
straight up classical
Well,
anymore.
let's talk about your singing. So, this is something that I learned about you maybe in the last 2 years or so. That,
Okay, okay.
that you're a singer, you enjoy singing, that you're a songwriter, you're putting out albums, I think, with
Yes.
their own vocals. To tell us about that.
Yeah, so I mean, my songwriting actually started probably when I was 16, 17. Like I kind of said, back in school, I had my two friends who influenced me, and I listened to bands and artists growing up. So I really enjoyed the concept of making songs, having a whole story told in 2, 3 minutes. It always really appealed to me, and I'm also a big sucker for sticky hooks and melodies. I would consider myself a melodic composer, but I also really enjoy creating harmonies that move the story along. And I'm a strong believer in the 80-20 rule that the way I see it, if you have 80% traditional harmony, throwing in that 20% of spice is always a good idea to keep things moving and not make the whole piece feel static. And I think it's something I've just subconsciously done throughout my entire life, especially as I've developed more as an artist and composer. I feel like it's just super, super fun to create music that makes people feel something. Of course, as the actual songwriter composer yourself, you are consciously putting in those chords or those notes, but it's always fun to wonder like how are other people interpreting this music. So yeah, I mean, at the moment, I'm working on a few albums this year, and last year I was very unproductive musically, and that was a big factor into why I decided to do 3 studio albums this year. So my very first one was a live recital back in June. That was a series of 10 pieces for piano plus a solo instrument. So there was one for piano cello, one for piano flute, one for piano oboe, and so on.
Mhm.
And then after that, in August, I decided to release a follow-up album to my debut from 2021, and that's more of a poppy album. And then this third one I'm about to release in a week or so is a Christmas album. So I wrote 10 original Christmas songs, arranged them, hired some live players for them, and I mean, it's probably the project I'm the most proud of so far. I'm really excited to put it out there,
That's
but
great.
yeah, it's just been really fun to explore within myself and refine my sound and get more practice writing and all of that. So it's been a really fun journey.
Have you done anything with licensing your songs for film or TV or anything like that, or is that a goal for you?
Yeah, honestly, I would love something like that. The only thing is I just don't know where to look.
Okay.
And yeah, like I was showing the Christmas tracks to a few friends of mine, and they were saying, "Oh, you should definitely shop this to Disney or Hallmark," and I could definitely see those in there. I'm just like, I would love that, but who are those people? So
Yeah.
that it's definitely still on the in the works in progress, but it would be an amazing feeling to license the
Cool. We
music
can
for
talk
sure.
about that offline.
Oh, thank you.
That's great. Okay, so that was the
Yeah.
3 albums for this year. What about next year? Next year's coming up.
It is, it is. And I've been trying to think. I'm trying to find more of a balance, I think, in work, business, and also and also creatively. But it's like I might do like a piano recital, like a solo recital, composing some new music just for piano. Um, might do another album. I have no idea yet, but I think I just need to recover creatively at the end of the year first. And I'm going on vacation the last week of December, so I need
Nice.
a bit of time away. But yeah, the goal is to focus a bit more on the business again next year. Maybe mix in some creative work again. But the whole thing about working for yourself is that the entire process is a learning one. So you'll never really settle on the perfect workflow or perfect game plan your entire life. I feel like things you just have to adapt along the way. So far things are sort of fluid. Like I haven't really set anything in stone just yet, but that's where I'm currently at.
I do want to come back to you're saying you were introduced to digital audio workstations through
Mm,
GarageBand,
yeah.
and then I presume to Logic Pro, which would be the natural
Yes.
extension of GarageBand.
Yes.
And if someone said to me, "Who do you know who has the most number of orchestral libraries?" the first person I would think of is you. Now
That's so funny.
I don't know if that's a Guinness Book of World Record entry for you, but how many orchestral libraries do you have or have you gone through?
Oh gosh. You know what's funny? I actually pride myself on being a minimalist when it comes to orchestral libraries. Because honestly, from the libraries I do have, I probably use 2% of them, if that, probably
Hmm.
1%, 0.5%. Um, because there's also limited hard drive space, so you can't just collect forever. And I've probably deleted um, at least 100 libraries over the past few years. I think if I had to tally it all up right now, I probably have around 200 or so, but a lot of them are just small knickknack ones as well. The core workhorse libraries, those are the ones I'm using all the time, and I could count all of those on two hands. So,
And when you're composing and making a mock-up, do you generally try to go across those libraries? I mean, maybe that's not the way to think about it because that's not the objective is to use more libraries. The objective is to make beautiful music. But
mm,
do you find yourself relying on maybe the one or two, three things that you think like the old reliable or
mm.
so to speak, or do you have them like so well in your head that you know, hey, I'm going to go pluck the harp from here and I'm going to go strum the guitar from there and whatever I'm going to do from
Right.
this other one?
Yeah, I guess ultimately it just depends on the sound you're hearing in your head and which library can get you closest to that as quickly as possible. It helps that the music I write lends itself very well to the libraries I use on a regular basis, which is the Cinematic Studio series. Um, for anyone who doesn't know, their libraries feature really, really smooth legato. And while the sound is a bit on the darker side, you can always brighten that up later with EQ and all of that. But I do think there's something to be said about learning a very small number of libraries to the point where you feel entirely comfortable using them. And you only add to your collection if the need is really there, right? So one question I always share with my students to ask themselves is like, can you see yourself um, achieving this result? Maybe it's an instrument or a sound with an existing library that you couldn't with a new library. And if the answer is yes, I can probably achieve that same sound, then you don't need to buy the new library yet, right? You only want to pick something up if you really, really need it. So yeah, like I said, I really only use Cinematic Studio Series stuff, and I also use Cinesamples. Their
Mm-hmm.
contact libraries are wonderful. Haven't used Museo as much just because the contact stuff is just there and I'm used to the contact workflow. But those are the two big ones I'm using regularly. And some orchestral tool stuff, especially their choirs included in their Metropolis Arc series, their Time series, really beautiful stuff there. Um, but yeah, like as long as you have a specific sound you want and you know the ensembles you're writing for, then it just makes the most sense to use the libraries that can get you there the fastest. And for me, those are the libraries I understand and use the most on a daily basis anyway.
Do you find that you get a more realistic sound if you combine libraries for, let's say, string articulations or things like that, or do you like to stay
Mm,
within one library for your strings, just to pick one?
right. Yeah, I think that Cinematic Studio Strings is one library I'm confident in using exposed for string lines. And same for CSSS, Cinematic Studio Solo Strings. It's funny. I think CSSS is not even really intended for virtuoso solo string work in the first place. It's more intended for like quartets and like first chairs sort of stuff. But it's the legato is so good and the emotion in the samples is really just breathtaking. I tend to use that library and the regular CSS for a lot of my string writing without any layering involved. That being said, though, if I do want maybe a brighter string sound or I want even more lushness, then I might layer some orchestral tool stuff or performance sample stuff just to get a more specific sound I'm going for. But CSS, I'm never really worried about it sounding unrealistic, but on its own.
I have to say, one of the all of your writings that I've heard, anyway, especially your Disney-esque things, just
Mm,
beautiful. Lush is
thank you.
exactly the word to use. It's one of the reasons I invited you to be a judge on our 2023 Best Symphonina of the Year contest 2 years ago.
Mm,
Would love for you to be a judge again in the future or enter something. I know it would be well received.
thank you.
How do people get in touch with you, Chris, if they want to follow up with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is honestly on YouTube, just Christopher Siu, and I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, other things as well. But if you do want to hear some of my music, that's also on my YouTube channel. I have it in a separate playlist. But I also use DistroKid, so I put the music out there on Spotify and everything as well under my name. So, but YouTube would be the easiest place to find me. I feel like.
And you encourage people to reach out to you.
Yeah, if you'd like to, if whatever you want to share, if you have any questions or whatever, feel free. Yes, absolutely.
All right, Chris. Thanks so much for sharing your time. We're going to look forward to that Christmas album, and then we're going to see
Thank
what
you.
happens in 2025.
Yes, I'll keep you updated. Thanks, David.
All right, take care.
Thank you.